Hi folks, and welcome back to Meaning for Money. I'm standing here in front of just a random field of maize here in West Penwith, and I'm here to guide you through the maze of financial planning. Oh, see what I did there? So there's a lot of thought goes into these, I tell you. Now, we've been talking about wrappers. These are the things that you can put money in. They're essentially sort of tax boxes that you can put investment in. We talked last time about OICs and ICVCs and unit trusts. This time I'm going to talk about ISAs. Now, most people will have heard of ISAs. They are essentially tax-free savings, or as we'll come to in a minute, mostly tax-free. With ISAs, there are two components. There are cash ISAs, and there are stocks and shares ISAs. Now, there used to be something called a life assurance ISA as well, but that has now been sort of subsumed into the stocks and shares bit, so I'll cover that towards the end. But as of now, you've got a cash ISA and a stocks and shares ISA, two different kinds you can have. Now, the first thing to say is that there are limits to how much you can contribute to an ISA, because there are tax advantages of doing so, and obviously the government wants to encourage saving but doesn't want to give too much money away. So, with a cash ISA, the maximum you can put in any 1 year, and remember it's a contribution limit, not a limit to how much you can have in there, it's how much you can put in there in any 1 year. And the maximum is, a cash ISA is £5,100. Now, the maximum you can have in a stocks and shares ISA is £10,200. Twice the amount. But you can't have the maximum amount in both. The overall maximum is 10,200. So if you have the most you can put in a cash ISA of 5,100, the most you can have in the same year in a stocks and shares one is 5,100. The two together is 10,200. If you have the maximum in a stocks and shares ISA of 10,200, you can't have a cash ISA in that year as well. So there are maximum contribution limits. Now, a cash ISA is straightforward enough. It's essentially a tax-free savings account. So you get them with banks and building societies and with the National Savings, usually through the post office. A stocks and shares ISA can hold quite a lot of things. The correct name for them is qualifying investments. So you can have shares in a stocks and shares ISA. You can have funds that we've been talking about. You can have gilts, things like that. But for most reasonable, normal investors, you have shares or funds as a rule. Okay, there is a huge list of things and some things that you can't have, but for the purposes of simplicity, you generally speaking hold shares or funds of shares in a stocks and shares element. A couple of differences also between the two. With a cash ISA, you can have those from age 16. With the stocks and shares ISA, you have to be 18. For both kinds, you have to be resident in the UK or sort of equivalent resident. So if you're a crown servant, like an ambassador or a diplomat somewhere, you can also have them even though you're living overseas. So you have to be of the given age, you have to be UK resident. Let's talk about tax very briefly. As I said, with a cash ISA, essentially it's a bank account. If you have a normal bank account, you pay tax on the interest. Depending on how much other income you've got, you either pay tax at 20% or 40% and possibly 10%. I'm going to do a whole load on taxation in probably quite a few weeks' time, but for the purposes of this, a cash ISA is just a tax-free bank account, so you pay no interest, no tax on the interest at all. Now, in a stocks and shares ISA, the things you hold in them depends on what the tax situation is. If you hold gilts or a gilt fund, or a corporate bond fund, or a directly held corporate bond, or a fund which is mostly corporate bonds, then the interest is tax-free. But if you hold shares in there, then the income on shares is called dividends. And when you get paid a dividend, 10% is withheld notionally by the government, and you can't claim that back. So if you hold shares in an ISA, you can't strictly say it's tax-free. Importantly though, particularly with stocks and shares ISAs, is that they are free of capital gains tax. So that's a real benefit. Remember, the precursors to ISAs were called PEPs. PEP is a Tory word, and ISAs were brought in by the Labour government in the late 90s. But essentially the same thing. But if you have been maximising your PEP and then your ISA contributions each year, many people will have built up a significant sum, all of which is free of capital gains tax. So that's a real advantage of ISAs. Just finally, in the stocks and shares component over here, do you remember I said that there used to be something called a life assurance ISA? Well, the life assurance bit is now subsumed into the stocks and shares bit, and so you can contribute to a life assurance policy within an ISA. But I've never come across anybody who does that. I'm sure there are plenty, but they're rare. So generally speaking, people either have a cash ISA or a stocks and shares ISA. Very valuable, very important part. If you can, it's worth maximising your ISA allowances either in cash and stocks and shares, or fully in stocks and shares. And that's ISAs, and that's how they work. Very important. Next time we're talking about investment bonds. So from the maze of Maze behind me, see you next time.